Besides being a proving ground for officers, Bull Run demonstrated to both sides that much had changed in the years since the Mexican War. The development of the mini-ball, which allowed the rapid loading and firing of a weapon in combination with the rifled musket, greatly improved the effectiveness of shoulder weapons.
During the Mexican War, troops got within 100 yards of each other and fired weapons that were effective out to about 75 to 100 yards until they could blow a hole into the line on the other side with combined artillery, and then they'd charge through. An offensive line would usually break on a defensive line. The weapon was accurate 75 to 100 meters. The mini-ball made the rifled musket accurate out to 500 yards easy, and you could hurt somebody out to 1,000 yards. This now meant that the time that it took to cross the deadly ground jumped from a 1-minute time frame to 5 or 6 minutes. The defense had a whole lot more time to wipe out an offense.
The range of artillery, in contrast to the musket, had changed little between the Mexican and Civil Wars. Solid rounds could reach out perhaps 1,000 yards and explosive shells around 800. Canister loads were essentially a large shotgun shell, good out to about 400 yards, which was well outside the range of a smoothbore musket. It was the use of artillery at close range that blew tremendous holes in the enemy lines during the Mexican War, but similar attempts during the Civil War proved disastrous.
When they fight the first Battle of Manassas at Bull Run, they run the guns up within 400 yards of the enemy, get ready to blow a hole in the enemy line and charge forward just like they did. In the meantime, that enemy line stood up with rifled muskets that are now accurate out to 500, 600 yards, and they cut down the entire gun crew. And almost more important are the horses. And now that gun crew has absolutely no way of retrieving its guns. We keep thinking firearms progress, but they don't always progress at an equal pace.
A change in tactics was clearly needed, but the lack of training and skill among both officers and enlisted men meant it would be years before new methods of attack began to evolve.
Although technology is a constant, tactics will evolve very slowly through the Civil War, and part of that problem is the terrible attrition of officers and experienced men as the casualties are suffered by both sides. In the West, where perhaps more of the experienced veterans survive long enough to make some changes, they'll experiment with some rudimentary rushing tactics where part of the unit will fire and the rest of the unit will move forward in short rushes, kind of a rudimentary fire and movement system. While in the East, where perhaps there's a lower percentage of experienced veterans left in the Army, they'll drop back to an earlier era and try some experiments with narrow, compact column attack formations.
Although innovations in attack formations showed great promise in controlling smaller units, applying these same tactics to the enormous armies engaged in many battles proved difficult. For this reason, both Northern and Southern officers continued to adhere to Napoleonic-era formations.
The tactics we started the American Civil War with were the same ones that we used in the Mexican War. Everybody lined up shoulder to shoulder, presenting a fantastic target to the newly accurate weapon. The answer, of course, would be change tactics. Well, nobody had gotten that far to figuring out how to change tactics. All they knew to do was speed up the rate of march, get across that ground faster. So instead of going so many feet per minute, we marched faster and moved it up into 100+ steps per minute. That didn't do the soldiers in the line much good. They could run, and they were still going to get shot at and hit accurately. An answer might have been to spread out the line, to not present such a huge target. The problem comes with that is that technology had only increased in one area, not in several. A commander did not have the capability to control his line spread out over 3 times the distance or 4 times the distance. One of the reasons he marched in close columns was so he could yell, just a standard voice over the noise of gunfire and on the battlefield to be heard by his unit. There are no radios. Telegraph doesn't do much good on the battlefield. It doesn't do badly getting information to the battlefield. operationally, but it doesn't do much good on the battlefield. How can a commander control his forces if he's spread out?
The issue of how to control the immense armies that were thrown into combat during the Civil War was one that largely remained unresolved, even by war's end.
We're caught in a dichotomy here. How do we change tactics when we lose command and control just to alleviate a problem that technology has brought into us because of accuracy? The answer was build more spirit into the troops. They'll charge into anything, put the officers out front and let them lead it, and we'll manage to muddle through. We had about 10,000 casualties or so during the Mexican War. We ended up with 600,000 dead in the Civil War. That's the difference.
Even if tactics had evolved more rapidly, the belief that the war could be ended quickly, widely held in both the North and the South, failed to take into account the sheer size of the opposing forces.
In the American Civil War, there is no decisive battle. Decisive in the terminology of an annihilation. When you take the army, you defeat it, and that's it in this sector, in this theater. Part of the reason is because the armies are so large that no matter how well you do at surrounding it, you can't surround the whole thing. You can't take its entire supply because supply is coming by railroad.
Thanks to the railroads, the American Civil War witnessed a logistical revolution that would have far-reaching consequences.
From the home front to the railhead, you have industrial-age logistics that really you couldn't improve on very much today. From the railhead to the Army, you had the same logistical system as Alexander the Great used, muscle power. And I think that's one of the reasons why Civil War operations, particularly in the Eastern Theater, were so indecisive. That armies were very powerful when they were near their railheads, but as they attempted to leave their railheads, they became reliant upon this huge and very expensive animal supply train and ran out of combat power, especially if they were attacking an enemy who was sitting comfortably on his railhead. So I think in that sense, rail, in a negative way, really influenced the manner in which the Civil War was fought.